Yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, let's see. Then we have talked about the very hot topic of the erratic US trade policy, and we went the last time through this formula of evil in detail. But what I want also now to do to give you a little descriptive analysis of the EU and US and Chinese and US trade relation so that we somehow can maybe interpret this general announcement. Well, tariffs are my best friends. Well, although they are definitely not very well argued, or the US didn't give any reasons why they are of the opinion that tariffs are their best friends. But maybe or not maybe we have to deal with the situation, and therefore it is of course interesting what is now right now the specific trade relation between the three largest economic regions in the world. Well, and I did some analysis over Eastern, and therefore yeah, I at first started with so to speak a look at it. Well, if they announce something with relation to the EU and to China from the United States, how relevant is it? Well, that it is relevant is quite clear from the US point of view, then because you know that the United States are the largest economy in the world. And if we look at this in more detail, then we see that GDP, sorry for this, but I'm writing a slide a little research paper in German, and therefore the this is in German. And yeah, if you look at it, then you see at the size of the US GDP that they are around 25% of world economic production. And this is by far the largest part. And if we look at China and the EU, then they are roughly of the same size, but 10 percentage points smaller than the US. Well, and one reason for this is not that, well, so to speak, definitely economically, the United States are 10 percentage points larger than China and US, because you also know that in the US, I think we have roughly 350, 370 million people, and then in the EU, we have now minus UK, we are around, I think, 440, 450 million. So we are almost 100 million people more. And about this, I also already have talked. GDP is highly correlated with the number of people. And then in China, we have, of course, 1.3 billion people. Well, that then China is not 3 or 4 times larger in GDP than the other two regions is also quite clear, but because China is not highly developed in every region. So some regions in the midst of China, they have a welfare level of some countries in Africa. But the discrepancy between US and the EU of 10 percentage points, this is maybe quite surprising, but this has also to do with that we are measuring this. Have I written it down here? No, but in my research paper, measured in US dollar and nominal value. And since the euro has devaluated a little bit against the US dollar in the last years, this is also then the reason that, remember, macro curves, real and nominal variables, that we have, so to speak, a shrink nominally relative to the United States. But nevertheless, on average, still also measured in real terms, the US, although they are almost 100 million people less, lower than the European Union, they, on average, have a higher welfare level measured in GDP. So, and if we take all three together, then this means that with these three regions together, we have 60% of world production. So then, of course, looking at this three region is highly relevant for the development in the world. Well, and then we look, how do they depend itself, not in relation with the other regions, but itself on international trade. And there we see really a difference that the EU, although they are much smaller relatively than the US, they have the largest shares of exports and imports relative to world exports and imports. Of course, taking the world, then world exports and world imports should coincide, but there we have a statistical discrepancy a little bit. But nevertheless, if we look at here, the EU has 17 percentage points, 17% in both exports and imports share of world exports and imports. And for the US and China, we have some kind of asymmetry. And there we can maybe then deduce from this I love tariffs from the United States, although they gave no reasons, but from just a descriptive point of view, we see that relatively the United States do not export very much compared to their share of GDP in the world. Only half of the exports relative to the EU are the United States are exporting, but on the other hand, they are relatively almost exporting the amount of the European Union. Almost so, especially in 24, 14%. And the other way around is China exports almost that much as the European Union, but they are importing. Their imports are relatively low. So there we have an asymmetry. So relatively, China is exporting much more than importing. US are much more importing than exporting. And for the European Union, we have somehow level of exports and imports. And if you look at these numbers, you also have to be careful, unfortunately, and I would really say that this is a mistake, providing data. In quite a lot of studies, they go for the EU just to the IMF database or somewhere else, downloading the data and then adding up all exports and imports of the EU member states. Or even you find aggregates where the IMF or World Bank has done this for you. What could be the error? If you look at Germany, and you know maybe from my macro course that Germany is relatively the the largest trader in the world. So exports plus imports, what I've written down here. Down here, the so-called Offenheitsgrad or openness is X plus Im over GDP. That there for Germany, I think it's around 90%. So exports and imports are almost that large for Germany as our GDP. But who is our largest trading partner if we take exports and imports together. And there you can apply your knowledge from this lecture. What is not very surprising that every country is trading very much with which countries? Yeah, great. Yes. So your fellow colleagues just said, well, and this is what I meant. The aggregated largest trading partner is, of course, France for Germany. Um, uh, Not number one in exports, not number one in imports, but together it's the largest part. And of course, if we look at the international trade relation of the EU, we should exclude exports from Germany to France and the other way around, because then if we want to compare this with the United States, then we have also to look for with exports from California to New York. But it took a little bit time, but because I had to do it by hand, I excluded the intra EU data. This maybe should write down EU trade consolidated with intra EU trade. Because if you don't do it, around 50%, half of our exports and imports of Germany and all other EU countries are trading within the EU. And then you would double the absolute amount of EU trade part of the world trade. Because also if we have here 17%, well, it is not then that we have then 34%, of course not, because also the size changes by the additional intra-EU trade. And then I think it would be roughly around 26, 27% or so. But I would say it's a mistake because then I'm comparing apples and what heißt Birnen auf Englisch? I don't know. uh, apples and onions, maybe. Okay. Anyway, yeah, yeah. Well, this I already talked about this. Relatively, the share is the largest, and we have the asymmetry that in the United States we have, so to speak, large in quotation marks imports, low import exports, and the other way around for China. And this, of course, then translates in lower openness of China and the European Union, and by chance, China's openness is just in the middle, but this is just by chance, of course. Well, why is the openness of the rest of the world that much higher than the other ones? Well, this is also not very surprisingly, because we are looking here at the largest economic regions. And of course, very large economic regions, they can trade, they have a large, so to speak, intra-region trade. So they don't need relatively that much goods and services from other countries. And this is also, I think I said it when we looked at the gravity model of international trade, that the smaller a country, the higher is the degree of openness. Because just think also, why are we trading falling apart production point and consumption point, and a small country, of course, they cannot produce every goods they want. But if you look at the United States, and this is what Mr. Trump wants to do, he wants to produce all what they need within his borders. So maybe there is no reason by the US government that that it is good for them to raise their tariffs, But if we look only scientifically, descriptively on the data, then we see just, well, overall, the United States will have a large trade deficit. And then we leave economics. And if we want to talk neutrally about it, then, of course, from a political point of view, you can then decide, or you can then argue, well, this situation, that much goods I always buy from other countries, and I'm not fine with that. Okay, but I didn't value this, but from a descriptive point of view, there could be this idea that I want to change this, that I want to have maybe a situation like the European Union, where we have the balance of exports and imports. And this was what then in the formula, but with no reason. Okay, but then we want to go further. And of course, then taxes, they are then on bilateral dependencies between the regions. And then I look at what are these regions, or not EU with China, but EU with US, and China with the USA. What kind of goods or services are trading they with each other, and how do the exports and imports look like? And then I just divide it between goods and services. And there we have then a large discrepancy, dividing the overall trade in these two parts, goods and services. And this was the reason, because I looked also for the aggregated numbers and also for goods at 2023. We do not have good data or actual data for the services. You get only 2023 data. And there you also have deeply to dig in the internet to find good, so to speak, data. And even I have to admit that behind this data is, yeah, so to speak, a problem in services, that I have a large discrepancy between overall. So if I take world exports of services and world imports of services, I have a difference relatively in the numbers in goods in goods of, I think, 0.5%. There you can say, well, okay. But here it varies from year to year between, I think, 4 and 10%. Of course, but I think it's the best data I can find. And I have to work with the best things I can do. But then we are doing here only a descriptive analysis, and behind you have always to think, if you are doing statistics, that there is always an error. And the error, so to speak, in the service data is much larger than the error in the goods data. Okay, but this then. And if we look at first at the trade relations between US and China, what do we see? A very, very large asymmetry. See here, this again in thing is in English, this would be billions. You know the difference between Milliarden and billions, English and German. And what we see here, well, okay, the difference is roughly 300 billion US dollar. Oh, I have put it here. And this is, of course, a very large amount. And then, at least qualitatively, we have a difference, that the trade difference, the trade deficit changes sign if we go to services. And keep this in mind, this will later on much more important. Here, the exports of the United States are twice as large as the imports. So here, the United States have a trade surplus. But since the absolute values are 10 times lower than the absolute values here, especially from the imports, 40 to 400, then of course adding both together, we still have a large trade deficit of the United States with China. And then, of course, leaving also the economic interpretation, you can argue from a political point of view, yeah, maybe I have a high dependence on an autocratic regime. And maybe I want to lower this dependence. This would be then a reason for inhibiting trade with tariffs, with something else. And another reason is also, if you remember the magic square external balance, that for China we have the yuan, I think it's looked like this, or renminbi. They have these two currencies. There's a slight difference between them or renminbi, yuan, renminbi. This is not freely convertible. So China is somehow manipulating their exchange rate. They have roughly a fixed coupling on the US dollar. So they undervalue their currency. Undervalued relative to US dollar. Okay, and this again would be a reason why I want to raise tariffs to China, because I say, well, you are manipulating prices via your currency, it's undervalued, and therefore you can sell not for free market prices in my home country, but with lower prices. You are more competitive due to this undervaluation. And of course, this is then again an economic argument. Well, if you are intervening in the market process, then I also intervene, because the aim would be that we find an equilibrium in a free market. But and then I will end this. It becomes more complicated and complex. Well, they have written it down that this is complex because what China then also did, well, in order to undervalue your currency, you need the other currency. How to buy the other currency? I'm buying government debt. So, and if you look there again at the amount, then you see that China is by far the largest holder of US debt in the world. So someone with a smile said China is the Bank of China. China is the Bank of the United States. And I think, what was it? The little Bush 10 years? No, 15 years ago, when he sometime went to China, he said, well, he is looking at his banking account. But what this means, maybe you know that the United States are not only having a large trade deficit, they have also a large government deficit, government debt deficit every year. How do they finance it? via the government debt. And who pays for it? China. So there you see it is a quite complicated situation. And I think I also said it that at April 2, what China just started is, okay, you are harming us, then I'm starting to sell at the capital market government debt of the United States. What does this mean? Your interest rates are rising, your costs of refinancing rises. And this is what even Donald Trump is not does not like. Maybe this was also a reason that just 1 week later he postponed this, but not to China, but in general. So that because we had also this turmoil at the stock markets, and there maybe he said, it's maybe not the best idea I had in the last. Well, I didn't think that he had any good idea in the last 10 years, but anyway. Okay, so if we look at China, at least we can say there are some political and some economic reasons for intervening in international trade, or then in the end, well, I want to drive the deficit to zero. But you find not very much of this in the argumentation, or there is no argumentation by the US government. Okay, but this for the US and China. Then, and this is maybe for us, of course, more interesting when we look within the trade relations, the United States and the EU. Then we see we have, so to speak, the same deficit situation for the United States in the goods part, not 300, but minus 200 billion US dollars. But then, if we look at the services, then we see again it's the other way around. We have a trade deficit looking at the services with the United States, and a little bit less, but roughly the same order of the numbers. Roughly the same amount. And here on the right, and this is if you go into more detail, it is always good also to look at the relative numbers, but the direct argumentation is, I think, easier with the absolute values. But what you then in general see is that this trade deficit shrinks to half of it overall. Overall deficit of US, EU, roughly 100 billion US dollars. Well, okay, then you can still say, well, 3 digits, this is a number. And then please learn this using in economics relative numbers. Then you take this number and you say, well, how much is this relative overall to the overall trade? And then you see here, this is a 600, almost 1,000. So 1 trillion, trillion, 0.1 relative to 1.7 trillion. And this is then, can I calculate this in my head? Roughly 5%, or? I'm already in my 5th hour lecturing today. So let's take this one here. Oops. 0.1 divided by 1.7. Oh, quite good. roughly 6%. Well, 6% is not nothing, but 6% is not the world. And 6% is, of course, not a reason to starting a trade war. There is a deficit, okay. There is here also a deficit, a larger one relative to overall goods. It's 20 by 100, it's 20%, much more, of course, but also much less relative to the numbers of China. But on the other hand, you have more or less the outweighing via the services side. And then you are left with your argumentation. Why should I intervene in international trade? And if you also look at the history, you have two regions with more or less the same welfare level, the same standard of living. Roughly, we can say more or less on average, same preferences, living in the United States, living in the European Union. And then I think, and this is then normative, I would say we have learned within 250 years, it is a quite good choice living in a free democracy with free markets. Okay, I think that it was what I wanted to say with the numbers. Then let me go just quick again to the so-called optimal tariff theory. We have done this already. If you go back in your slides, there I put it by hand. This you will then see in my little research paper. So we here started, we deduced the overall world demand and world world supply. And I now, so to speak, just apply this to European Union and to the United States. And this is reasonable because together United States and the US are almost 50% of GDP in the world. So this I have redone here. You see this, and from this we then get the intersection of demand and supply at the common market, and this would be then the exports. And think of that these are the US and these are the EU, and this would be then these 100 or 200 if we look only at the or if we divide it goods and services, this would be the world market equilibrium. And then I argued graphically with you, well, we have this rectangle here, E, when we are introducing as the importing country a tariff of T, this is moving this wedge between supply and demand. So my prices, and this is really ridiculous, that definitely if I rise with an amount of 10 percentage points, 20, or with Vietnam 90 percentage points, or 145 to China, that then my prices in my country will rise. And so he is fighting inflation with increasing prices. So this is not only stupid, this is, I don't know what it is. So we have an increase of prices in the importing country and a drop of relevant selling prices, because I have, when I am at the border, when I am in New York Harbor or Los Angeles Harbor, then I have to pay this one. But this means for me in my home country, I have to face lower prices. So, and then I said, well, it is not that easy compared to the situation when I'm a small country, when I cannot change international prices. that I have here this rectangle, which is terms of trade revenue. This is because these two prices are driving away from each other. Okay, and then comparing with a small country, we said B plus D is our loss. And now I have this terms of trade revenue. So there could be a situation where E is larger than B plus D. There exists a situation where E is larger than B plus D. And why is this? Well, these are two triangles. And these two triangles are moving, so to speak, from points, opening up. And the rectangle is directly starting, not from a point, but from a line. And there you can think of that moving down, starting from world market prices, moving downward, that then just in the beginning, the larger rectangle is larger than the increase of these two triangles. But then afterwards, I'm broader and broader and broader in the triangles. Then I can also think then the additional area of the triangles will outweigh the constant increase of the rectangle. Well, even I think that is almost this is almost a strict mathematical argumentation, I think. Okay, and this then, of course, we know at first the surplus of E over B plus D will increase, and later on, when it will start to be outweighed by B plus D, there will a decrease, and therefore there has to exist an optimal T. So T maximizing E minus B plus D. I don't know, have you done in other lectures, maybe in micro optimal tax rate? There you said you have this picture, Px, supply demand, then you moving upward your supply curve, and this of course then this is similar to here, where C plus E are your tariff revenue overall. These are your tax revenue. And of course, in the beginning, you have a very small rectangle, small tax revenue, then it is increasing. And if you, in the end, more or less at prohibitive tax rates, then of course you are driving tax revenues in the end to zero. And therefore you also have to have a tax revenue depending on the tax rate is looking like this, that you have here T max. This is the so-called tax lever curve. Have you heard of the so-called tax lever curve? Mr. Lever was also a famous economist, and he was also in the Council of Economic Advisors in the government of Ronald Reagan. And he even said, well, we have a very nice situation in the United States in the end of the 1970s, because our tax rate, 1979, in the race between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, there it was argued we are here with our average tax rate on the right of the optimal tax rate, and this would mean decreasing tax rates means increasing tax revenue. I'm lowering the tax rates and we will have more money. Well, you know, Ronald Reagan, he is already dead, but he has won the race and he lowered the tax rates and the tax revenues didn't increase. But anyway, this is economic theory, and maybe he has won the poll because of this. Okay, but these are always nice little exercises we give you, and we will do, so to speak, now a little bit more complicated because we have these two countries and we have to the outweigh of B and D. But in the end, it is, so to speak, the same argumentation as the tax level curve, what we are doing now here, optimal tariff theory. And yeah, 1 o'clock. Then we want to start. And yeah, I will take this picture now in parallel because I think you can think of that if we take this, I said to you last time that we take explicit demand and supply functions, and we now always have to insert these calculated equilibria in the demand and supply functions again, and that you are not lost in parallel, I will always point it here. Where are we now inserting and what we are calculating? And again, that I do not make that much mistakes. I have done it by hand, and you see it. It is somehow a little bit complicated. Well, it's not a lot. It's a little bit messy, so to speak. It's not complicated. It's everything is linear, so it is always calculating the intersection of two lines. But it is a little bit messy. Okay, so then let's start. Maybe I take also different colors. Let's start with country A. Of course, at first we need equilibrium under autarky in country A. 55 minus 10 and 5 plus 20. What do we have to do? And now please help me. You can also, I open the chat, type it in or open your microphone. What do I have to do? This is always the same. Yeah? Yeah, of course. So SA equals DA, and hopefully I can do it in my head. So it's 55 minus 5 divided by 10 plus 20. Okay? So X star A is 55 minus 5 divided by 10, because it's on the one side it's minus 10, on the other side it's plus 20. So putting the minus 10 to the other side, it means 10 plus 20. 10 plus 20, and this is 5 over 3. And the next one, I think you have done it quite a lot of times, just inserting in D or S. So P star A will be then 115 divided by 3. This we do, of course, now let's take it in green, also for B. So we have XB star is 52 minus 6 divided by 10 plus 6, no, not 6, 0, because so to speak, we have here a 0 of the cut of the vertical axis, and 16, yeah. And this we can write as 13 over 4, and this means P star B is, where do I find it? Inserting it 39 over 2. Okay, this means, what do we have? We have now this point and we have now this point. Okay? So, and now we need the slopes of the world demand and world supply. This is now again a little bit tricky, and this has to do with the interchange of the axes in economics. I think I have in macro or even in this course, I have talked about this, that here in economics, 100 years ago, we have interchanged the axes relative to school mathematics, because we write demand is a function of prices. and then in school you would have you would write down the x of p on the vertical axis. And somehow we have here now the same problem to obtain the slope, because how can we obtain the slope? The slope would be then given some quantity, then we look at the difference in prices between these two. So this means the slope of the supply and demand in the world is not just the difference of the slope of demand and the demand and supply in both countries, but we have to take the inverse and then consolidate it so that we obtain this line, so to speak. And this we have to obtain for every price. So, and this means then that we obtain, so to speak, SW, sorry for this, SW and demand in the world. Where can I find it in my, that it is adding the inverse of the slopes. So what we need is, so to speak, here I called it S and D are the slopes, and this is then 1 over S plus 1 over D. And if we put this together, then you obtain D plus S over SD. And then again, because we interchange the axis, you have to take the inverse of this. So the slope of SV or dW we obtain then as SD over the sum of the two slopes. Maybe you go through this again at home. But it is not hard, but it is a little bit messy, but you have to do it once and then I think you know what you are doing. So then inserting just using the SADA as small b numbers, then we obtain here for as W, we start at price 39 over 2 plus, and where do I have it? 15 over 4. X, this would be P, and dW, where do I have it? 115 over 3, demand falling, minus 20 over 3, X. So then setting this together, this I do not write out, but you have to equate also world demand and world supply, of course, and then we obtain X W star, where I have XW star, 226 over 125, and PW star equals 657 over 25. 657 over 25. So what have we now? We have now this one here. Okay? You're still in business? I haven't lost you? Roughly, yeah? So keep always this picture in behind, then I think you can go through it. Okay, So, and now we are driving this wedge in between, but now the difference is we do not say this is 5. We just say this is just some number, because in the end we want to calculate the optimal number where b minus E minus b plus d is the largest area. So then we again, so to speak, graphically subtracting now world demand at some hypothetical point minus world supply and setting this equal to T. And doing this graphically, then we end up with PA WT, and then subtracting T, we end up at PB WT. Okay? And this then means driving wedge T between SW and DW. We obtain then, and therefore we have this index here, the upward shifting price for the importing country depending on the tariff rate. And this will be then this one, PWAT is then, and not surprising, so to speak, well, of course, setting T to 0 means at which price would be. Which price would be PWTA if the tariff is absent? Tricky question. Yeah, of course. Then we are at the world market price, world market equilibrium. So not very surprising. Given the dependence, we start with the fixed part, 657 over 25. Plus now, how is it increasing? This is again now depending on the slopes of world demand and world supply. So it is the same thinking or the same calculation as we have done before, but only 90 degrees shifted. Okay? And we end up then with 16 over 25 times T. Of course, then we can directly write down PB WT, because this is then, of course, 657 over 25 minus T. Minus T are 25 over 25 times T, so minus 9 over 25 times T. Okay, 9 plus 16 is 25. Oh, these are actually Pythagorean numbers, I see. Do you know what Pythagorean numbers are? Just the sides of a rectangular triangle. 5, 3, and 4. Famous trouble, the famous triple. 3, 3 squared plus 4 squared is 5 squared. There are not many of these triples. I think the next one is around 1,000 something. This is the number theory if you are interested in number theory. Maybe. Okay, well, let's go forward. Okay, well, and so to speak, we are almost done now. Because why? We go again in our picture. We have now, so to speak, everything to calculate all these things. We know the starting point. We know also this one here. This is PWTB. And now it's just geometry. So inserting PW in the demand function at in demand function in the importing country, we obtain this point. This point we obtain when we inserting the PWT in the not the demand in the supply function of A. Then we have this part. So this is this part of the triangle B. Of course, we also know the height of the triangle. The height of the triangle is just PA minus world mark price. We have also directly the same here. We inserting PW and PA into the demand function. This is just inserting. You have these functions. We are now just, oops, sorry, just inserting the known numbers we have already into these functions. And of course, we also know this distance here because this is PW minus PWPB. Also this we have. We have, of course, also the amount of the imports depending on the tariff rate. And the area of a triangle is basis times height divided by 2. And the area of a rectangle is just A times B. Okay? So I will not do it now in detail, but I think if you sit down 15 minutes at home, you can really redo it at home. Okay. And just look then in parallel in the video if you do not really remember it. But please try this. So then in the end, I think I can give you B plus D. We obtain B plus D. There also is a nice thing. You will then see that many things are just canceling out because of the very simple geometry here. And this will be then very surprisingly, I think this one can also generally show that it is. We have found here that this part just squared is the sum of the two triangles. I think this one can also in general show if you do not introduce numbers, but you say if the 55 is capital A, capital D, or something like this. Okay, so this will be B plus D, and E. This was a little bit more complicated, I think. Where do I have E? Where do I have E? Yeah, here it is. 2034 over again minus 180, 108 over 3000 times t and times t squared. Well, and this that you really, these numbers have to do something with each other. You see, if we just square this, we obtain 192 over the same number down here, t squared, and then comes the really hard part to optimize it. So then the change in welfare, increasing the tax, would be E minus B plus D, and this we can do in our head, of course. We have here only one part with the exponent of 1 at t. This we just write down over and then minus 108 minus 192, and this is 300, I think, or 108 plus 192 is then minus 300 over this squared. Here we have also a t. I shouldn't forget this. And fortunately, this cancels out to 12 over 125. So in the end, we have, depending, the surplus of E over B plus D equals 2034 over 3125 times T minus 12 over 125 times T squared. So in order to optimize it, there are different strategies. Which one you would suggest when this we want to maximize? And how do we obtain the optimal T that this number is maximized? What can we do? There are many strategies how we can find out this. My eldest one has just done this in class 11 right now. Optimizing, especially in economics, what we are always doing. And I have done it in the Heckscher-Ohlin in the specific factor models also quite often. Yes, first derivative, yeah. So, prime, and this is? Yes, just here, it's canceling or not canceling, it's vanishing the t. And, yeah, and 2 times 12 is 24. Yeah, minus 24 over 125 t. So we obtain t is, and then turning it around, 2034 times 125 over 24. And fortunately, many things are canceling out, and you obtain over 100 is 3.39. Okay, and then you can now argue, well, still we have the trade deficit with the United States, and Mr. Trump is right, because there is an optimal tariff rate that he can increase welfare due to our general neoclassical theory. But then we have to admit, where do we find relatively this tax rate? And there, think again about this graphical interpretation, why there is the existence of this optimal tariff rate means in the beginning, starting from free trade, just in the beginning, the increase of the rectangle E outweighs the small additional area of the two triangles, and afterwards they are passing by. So if you do not have very, 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 very special demand or supply functions, how do they have to look like? They would have to look like, so this would be the normal, and then you are moving downward here. So to speak, linear, and quite often we do in the neighborhood of an equilibrium, we do linear approximation if we do not really know the demand and supply functions. So just choosing, so to speak, these very easy functions, also this has a reason. Because quite often we say, well, we do not have the information about the overall supply and demand function, but we know there is the equilibrium. This can be deduced from the data, and then we say, just mathematically, The first shot is this Taylor approximation, that we are approximating some complicated functions in the neighborhood of one point just with linear lines. So also this is not only a stupid calculation and annoying any students, this is also has practical value doing it like this. And how would need these functions have to look like? Where do I can picture this? Maybe here. Well, that, so to speak, the triangles do not really increase. This would mean that maybe your supply looks like, or your demand looks like this. No, it's the supply, and your demand looks like this. So almost inelastic. Because then, of course, the rectangles which are starting here to be, they would not increase anymore very much, but not the rectangles, the triangles, but the rectangle would then still increase more than the triangles. But actually, then we have to admit such a situation we do not find. And on the other way around, this would mean, well, fair enough, there is this optimal tax rate, but we know under the found general circumstances in the world, this tax rate would be relatively very small. Because it is optimal only in the beginning, starting from the equilibrium. Well, and then the next point, and this would be then the picture downward here. So here we can say USA and EU, and then we turn it here the goods market. We turn it the other way around, and then we would have here the EU and here United States in the service market. Well, then we are calculating our optimal tariff rate, and what ends then is that we have a loss from the goods tariff rate of the area F and the United States from the service tariff rate we are imposing on US American services of, let's say, F prime. And what we here directly see is, of course, and for linear lines, this can be generally shown, that if both markets have roughly the same amount, and this is true for the goods market and the service market in for the trade relation between United States and the EU. So all areas, also standard of living, preferences, as I argued, everything is more or less the same. This would be then also mean that all the areas of my rectangulars and so on are also quite the same. And then this means this F and this F prime would outweigh this little gains here from the optimal tariff. So overall, everybody is losing. Again, goods and services, goods market or goods trade, China, United States, 10 times larger, still have this large deficit, also relative to the smaller overall trade between China and the US. There again, you could say, well, maybe there is some argumentation from optimal tariff theory. But we have to admit, not 145%. Maybe 5 or 10. Okay, that's it. And yeah, I think I will reorganize the lecture a little bit, that I will postpone, so to speak, other exercises for Ricardo. And did I have already made the exercises for Ricardi. This I have already made, but the exercises then also for Heckscher Olin, that we talk about other trade theories, because also your term paper is coming in 4 weeks. And but we will do then also some exercises, and maybe in your term paper I will give you some kind of an exercise looking like this, what we have done here, giving you some functions, and then you should take yourself through. You have 3, 4, 5 days for it. I think it's then possible that you manage this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for today.